Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm feeling honored by this, really. And I like the campus very much. The university is, it looks pretty and it looks very nice. So I'm really happy to be here. I try to be louder as I see that it might not be heard from back seats. So today's talk will be, I gave a kind of general title actually. However, I think I found a good title in the sense that it more or less explains what we faced in terms of radical changes over the past decade, past more than a decade in Turkey. And the religion is one of the dimensions of that. And democratization, we can name democratization Turkey's transformation, because recently you have been hearing about Turkey as going more and more authoritarian because of Turkish ex-prime minister and current president's words and acts, and you might have heard extensively about what happened in Turkey after the Gezi Park events 2 years ago. I mean, I try to frame it not as authoritarianization. Still, I frame it as democratization, in the sense that Turkish politics has been radically transformed over the past few years, and we have seen more civic involvement of politics, more, I would say, deliberations and discussions on some key crucial issues on Turkish politics, from Kurdish question to place of Islam in Turkish politics to the minority rights, etc. So Turkish politics turned to be slightly open to challenges from outside and bottom-up pressures from inside. And since 2002, Turkey has been governed by a single-party government led by the Justice and Development Party, and this party gained consecutively 3 elections, general elections, 3 local elections, 1 presidential election, and now we are approaching to another general election in June, and it still keeps the recent surveys show that it still keeps more or less 40% of the votes in its pocket. So there is a high probability that they might gain this election too. But but the Turkish politics has been seriously shaken by the pressures of other forces, from the Kurdish groups to other societal groups, civic groups, I would say, civil society groups, etc. So Turkish politics turned to be more pluralized and also more polarized at the same time. However, the space for deliberation turned to be slightly open than before, because I was able to live and become part of those changes over the past more than a decade, and I was able to follow it closely. And most of my articles were on those processes of changes. I did my PhD on Spanish transition. I looked at more how international context affects domestic transformation. Then I moved my studies more onto Turkish politics from the early 2000s onwards. So I was able to follow it in that respect, and I was able to follow how Turkish foreign policy has been transformed too. Turkey has been relatively open to negotiations in most of the critical foreign policy issues too, from Cyprus to Armenian issue to to other foreign policy issues that is considered as taboo in the Turkish foreign relations. So I will name it again slightly as a democratization, not authoritarianization of Turkey's politics. Of course, and one of the most important, I would say, dimension of the Turkey's transformation over the past more than a decade is a European dimension. Because Turkey's relations with the EU goes back to the post-war period, from the late 1950s onwards. Turkey had close relations with the West in general, but also its relations with the European Union. Then the European Economic Community was relatively one of the earliest ones which projected membership, etc. Although we are not still a member of the EU, European dimension turned to be more and more critical dimension of Turkey's domestic politics from the late 1970s and early 1980s onwards. When the military coup d'etat occurred in 1980, the European approach towards Turkish politics was slightly different from the American ones, which we know that they supported the coup, and the Europeans said no, because they were the ones who suffered from the results of the coup. Flood of asylum seekers, refugees going to Europe, and they they were much more near than other countries, other part of the Western alliance to what happens in Turkey. And we see that this European dimension has been, slightly more and more an integral part of Turkey's domestic transformation, because when Turkey applied in 1987 officially for the membership, and the response was quite frank by the Europeans. Resolve the Kurdish issue, resolve the Armenian issue, resolve the Cyprus issue. And they outlined a list of resolutions of serious conflicts, both inside and outside of Turkey's political spectrum. Then, 1995, the customs union agreement came. The Turks thought that this will bring membership. It didn't. Later, the relations entered to crisis in 1997, but from 1999 onwards, the things had a serious change. I mean, especially the European side started to look at the Turkish case from a more positive angle, and this seriously affected what happens in Turkey. Turkey was granted as an official candidate for EU membership in 1999 in Helsinki summit, and from then on Turkish transformation gained a momentum, in the sense that Turkey thought there is a positive signal that we could be a member soon or in the midterm, and the negotiations will start. From then onwards, Turkey issued 7 reform packages. Some of them are very critical about the topic that I'm now going to go on. And this was an important, actually, change in Turkey's politics. From 1999 onwards, we saw that Europe is more than ever a part of Turkey's domestic transformation, and especially the third reform package, which was issued in August 2002, was an important reform package. It granted, first of all, it abolished the death penalty. It granted minority foundations to regain their property rights, and their properties, and also it gave an important signal to the domestic politics in terms of granting right of broadcasting in languages other than Turkish, which refers basically to Kurdish. So that third reform package, which created also a kind of earthquake in Turkish politics in August 2002, that the tripartite coalition of the time collapsed, and the Justice and Development Party, which governs the country since then, came to power after that reform package, because one of the coalition partners, the Nationalist Action Party, Nationalist Party, said, we can approve this package, but we want elections. So the Ecevit government, Bülent Ecevit, who is famous with his decision to intervene in Cyprus in 1974, said, okay, then they went to elections and they lost elections terribly, actually. This current party came to power there with slightly more than 30% of the votes, but gained a majority government. So and since then they are in power. And we see, when you look at the economic and political analysis, statistics, they were able to bring a kind of stability to Turkish politics. They were able to bring a slightly good economic growth, and their foreign policy until recently was kind of celebrated both by the Americans and by the Europeans, because this zero problems with neighbors. That is the label of their foreign policy. Functioned or was approved by the Europeans, which were celebrating, who were let me say supporting this idea of peaceful coexistence of the accession countries, and also their neighborhood policy. European neighborhood policy was more or less based on the same principles of, functionalist ideas of opening trade, opening borders with neighbors, etc. So their approach was slightly approved by the West. Until recently, this was the case, really. I would say until 2008. Even after 2008, they were still, this was a government which was celebrated by many circles in the West. That is what I'm seeing. However, in this respect, the religious dimension, I should probably touch in a larger, subtitle here, because when you look at the regime that was established in the 1920s after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, that regime, which is called Kemalist regime, which was based on the principles of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, and one of the most important principles was laicite, was secularism. Secular character of the republic was, underlined a lot, and it was probably one of the most integral characters of the regime, and this was kept very seriously, and Islam was not taught as the other, but it was not actually the main ideology of the regime. It was the secularism, it was the laic character of the regime. And I put here three, I would say, lines, because when you look at the religion and state relations, in Turkey, the discussion, when you look at the literature, is based on political Islam and religion, political Islam and state, etc. So the religious phenomenon in Turkey was mainly shaped by the secular character of the state and the regime, Kemalist regime, and its relations with Islam. So, however, I thought, and that is why I argue, and that is what actually the EU framework revealed us, that Turkey's relation or state-religion relations or religion-democracy relations in Turkey has three dimensions. One is political Islam. The other is Alevis, a religious minority within Islam, but not institutionalized as a separate religion from Islam, and non-Muslims. And this was framed as a minority issue. in the case of Turkey, because Turkish Republic, when it was founded after the Treaty of Lausanne, granted minority rights to non-Muslims. When the literature speaks about state-religion relations, they don't speak about non-Muslims as within the framework. The European Union, which we see in the Commission reports, which are published on Turkey since 1998, because European Union publishes reports for the candidate countries since 1993, and it started to publish reports about Turkey, annual reports from 1998 onwards, and we see that these both two issues are framed under the title of freedom of belief or freedom of religion. And this is not framed as a separate issue in terms of religion. This is freedom of expression. Interestingly. So, the academic literature and the Commission documents give us different lines of that. And I try to say in this topic, apart from general democratization, and the improvement of the situation of the Kurds, improvement in terms of freedom of expression, in terms of other aspects of democratization, we see especially from 2002 onwards, a slight improvement in all these three aspects of state-religion relations. So Turkish politics in that respect, the Kemalist regime in that respect, faced a serious transformation from 1999 Helsinki summit onwards, but especially 2002 onwards. So this also corresponds to general literature on Europeanization, meaning that the European impact on domestic affairs, we can name various scholars who did work on this issue, and most of my papers are on this, how international context and international actors affect domestic change. And I see that in addition to overall transformation of Turkey's politics, the European Union had clear effects on this very, very regime problematic. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So the Kemalist regime faced very serious challenges, and you can follow it in those commission reports, and you can follow it from de facto events. Because first of all, when you look at the political Islam case, you see Turkey, was as I mentioned from the beginning, was considered as a secular state, and it excludes religion, especially political Islam, from governing bodies, levels, etc. And one of the latest coup d'états which took place in 1996 was basically considered a postmodern coup d'état. It was done against a coalition government, but mainly it was done against the religiously oriented welfare party. So the Islamists actually, in their first experience in 1990s, in their first experience of government in 1996, faced a serious blow from the top bureaucracy, from foreign ministry, from the army. So they had to leave the government. But from 1996 to, let's say, 1999, here Helsinki summit, to 2002, the Islamists were able to came to power in 2002 of course, as a result of a big economic crisis and political crisis. In 2001, Turkey, with Argentina, suffered one of the most serious economic crises. And in 2002, as I mentioned before, they suffered a serious political crisis, and the coalition government simply collapsed. And the Justice and Development Party, AKP, let's say, Adalet ve Kalkınma Partisi, came to power in 2002, and it came to power as an interestingly pro-EU coalition of political forces, political and social forces. They named themselves as conservative Democrat. But in terms of the coalition of forces that supports that party, they were, taking the support of small and medium enterprises in Anatolia, big business. They were, they together with all these secular forces, I would say, economic and strong forces, they were able to lobby at the European Union. And we know very well that from 2002 to 2005, let's say, 2005, when the negotiations with the EU started, in that interval, Justice and Development Party received serious pressures from the side of army, because they wanted to deviate from the serious foreign policy issue, Cyprus issue, and the army did not allow them to do. And we know that from various cases that were, opened after that, judicial cases, that Justice and Development Party was under serious power, and the EU option was the savior of that party, actually, because the Europeans saw them as the agents of democracy, and many of the, let's say, social coalition forces saw them as that, and they saw that there is a possibility of opening negotiations. So the EU helped the political Islamists, actually, to gain a quite legitimate post in quite serious legitimacy in the general political spectrum of Turkey. And in 2008, when the closure case was opened against that party, again, EU guys, Manuel Barroso came to Turkey, and EU, the head of enlargement came to Turkey. They took the Justice and Development Party from the how to say, dar ağacından aldılar, from the yes. So this is the story that that you can follow, that the political Islam, actually, thanks to the EU framework, thanks to the EU opening, gained a serious legitimacy in that case. And this is the case for the Alevis too. Although we will see the crash of all of them later, because then we will see that the democratic demands of these two groups actually did not correspond with the authoritarian and the governing claims of the political Islamists of today. So the Alevis, this is a heterodox group of religious people in Turkey. Mainly, most of them are Turkomans, and of course there are also a slightly small minority of the Arab Alevis who lives in around Antioch and Urfa, etc. It's the southern provinces, but they are mainly Turkomans, and they during since the Ottoman times they were never recognized as a separate religion outside of the Islamist Ummah, I would say. The EU helped them in two respects. First of all, when you look at the Commission reports under the freedom of belief and freedom of religion title, EU always underlined that their special place of worship is never recognized. Their leaders of religion are not, their what we call dede, or grandfather, are not recognized, are not finance, and their beliefs are not recognized, and the compulsory religious education in Turkey doesn't recognize them as separate. So the EU actually brought the Alevi case very strongly as part of Turkey's religious freedom issue, and they did also something very particular, especially in Germany and Austria. They were able to gain legitimacy as separate from the Sunni community, Sunni Turkish community who lived there. Their belief were taken to religious textbooks, and the textbooks generally in primary and secondary schools. Of course, this communitarian practice there affects the Alevis in Turkey, and they look and they show the government that look, the Alevis are having and their identity is recognized there. Why don't you do it here? So the government, the Justice and Development Party government, since 2006 arranged kind of opening there. So the politicians go to their religious ceremonies, some Cemevi, their religious place, were granted some special privileges, and the municipalities were able to finance their costs, etc. And the Justice and the Open Party also opened, made an opening towards the Alevis. They made them. They made seven Alevi workshops. Deliberations with the heads of Alevi scholars and representatives, and the Sunnis. They were sitting, almost 400 members of the community from the Alevi side and from the Sunni side, including the religious directorate, who is responsible all these, started to sit and discuss the issue, etc. But we see that from the third workshop onwards, they did not. The Alevis were not very convinced that the Justice and Development Party and the state was seriously, involving or responding to their demands. Instead of being deliberative, I would say, they saw the Alevi opening of the government as therapeutic. Is it correct word? It's a kind of therapy, social therapy. It's not seriously negotiating. So the Alevis, became awakened and also gained some good instruments from the European practices, and the European Union with its reports and its declarations, etc., brought the Alevi issue very well and pressurized the government to deal with that. Actually, they told the Islamists, the AK Party guys, that the EU saves your democracy, but at the same time you are expected to open that democratic space to other groups in the country. Until now, we see that they have not been very successful. So the Alevi demands were not responded by the Justice and Development Party, except for few, cosmetic, moves, etc., etc. So in regards to non-Muslim minorities, this is a special thing. As you see, this is actually a religious issue, but this is framed as a minority issue because the Lausanne Treaty, which establishes the Republic, frames it as a minority issue. But the European Union takes it under the freedom of religion issue, because actually it's a freedom of religion issue. In basic terms. There is this system which is called millet system in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans granted the government of internal affairs of the religious communities to the heads of religious communities. Okay, so they were managing their churches, their marriages, their domestic problems, etc., etc. So there was this millet system and the ummah. These are the Muslims. Were constituting the two different angles of Ottoman public, actually. And the millet system uh, millets were not foreigners actually. Millets were part of the Ottoman system. Millets were part of the Ottoman social structure. They were not foreigners. But the Republic made them foreigners, unfortunately. So the Republic, Turkish Republic, let's say, which was established in 1923 by the Lausanne Treaty, took them as something out of the nation. Do you understand what I'm saying? The Ottomans, you see from the late Ottoman period, from the 19th century onwards, wanted to build a constitution based on a citizenship on territorial level, including all these millets and the ummah to the same level. Okay, but there the Republic, actually reversed the situation, despite the idea that they are all citizens. They rhetorically they brought them. Rhetorically, Republic brought the citizenship idea, but separated the non-Muslims as minorities. And minority, actually, in Turkish context, is quite a derogatory term. It's not the term like you see in the European practice. Minority is something equal, special, and to be treated, seriously. But in the case of the Turkish practice, it is not so. So they were actually, I would say, domestic foreigners in many respects, because first of all, they were never seriously become a part of the domestic debate on democracy, on defending rights and discourse. So recently we see that thanks to media, thanks to the open space, we see that the Armenians or Armenian demands or non-Muslim Greek Orthodox scholars, etc., public speakers, opinion makers are on the agenda, but no one knew before that most of the cinema artists or most of the theater players or football players were Armenians, were Greek Orthodox, etc. They never were considered as physically part of it. I'm not speaking about legal or the other segregations that they live in bureaucracy, in public offices, etc. So they were not physically there. So of course their let's say their population decreased terribly, because the Republic was established after a massive population exchange with Greece. So most of the Greeks who lived in Anatolia left Turkey and went to Greece, and most of the Turks who live in Greece and also in other Balkan countries came to Turkey. So the Anatolia was completely cleansed by the treaties from other religions, and also 1915, First World War, the Armenian massacres and removal of all Armenians from from Eastern Anatolia left the country mainly dominated by Muslims and the Turkomans, Alevis, who are living there. But this shrinking of population increased. Non-Muslims includes Jews, Greek Orthodox, and Armenians. Okay. So the Jews, because of the head tax or varlık vergisi, wealth tax, serious amount of Jews left Turkey in 1942, and of course after the establishment of Israel, also they left. More or less 30,000 Jews are living in Turkey now. Greek Orthodox, after this population exchange, again suffered from another crisis in 1955-56, when the Cyprus crisis emerged between Turkey and Greece. This affected the Greek Orthodox who live in Istanbul. They had, there was a mob, and their shops and their houses were attacked by Turkish people, and they had to leave the country, and most of them simply left their property there and went there. So, around I would say 35,000 Greek Orthodox are living in around Istanbul now. Their population is even less, you say. Yeah, I don't know. So the Armenians, there's 1915. After that, according to latest census based on religious, and this it was 1967. And since then they calculate, that they think that now 75,000 Armenians are living in Turkey. So they are really minorities now. So, and however, they have their rights, but their issues are mainly framed within the minority thing, not as a freedom of religious thing, and that's why, for instance, sometimes when there is a serious issue of opening a Halki seminar school, which is a priest seminar school in one of the islands of Marmara Sea, the Turkish government reacts that it's not a freedom of religion matter, it's a matter of reciprocity between Turkey and Greece, because Greece is treating the Muslims and the mosques like that, so we don't open that. So do you see what the debate there is, from an official point of view, is a matter of legal reciprocity, because the Armenian, the minorities are there. This is not a matter of religious freedom. And this is again related with the Greek Orthodox Church's demand of ecumenical status. It was considered not as a freedom of religion, although EU says it is. It is considered as a matter of legality. Whether an international legal status to a religious group could be given beyond Turkish legal system, because the patriarch is now dependent on local government in Istanbul. So it's a part of, and all their issues of property, etc., have been treated within the framework of the foundations. There is a directory of foundations which deals with all these property issues, and as you see, from 2002 onwards, the Justice and Development Party government doesn't resolve the problems once for all for the non-Muslim minority. It uses kind of step-by-step technique, or when it feels itself under pressure, opens a new church, or opens a new returns an orphan school, or opens a monastery, or returns a piece of land in Eastern Anatolia, or opens another monastery. So this is, there are many monasteries. So the strategy that the government follows is, is better than the previous one. Actually, they were the ones who closed all and let them collapse. But the Justice and Development Party is not resolving it as a whole too. So I'm not going to take much of your time with my talk, but I end up here. So the situation is more or less here in terms of religious freedom of religion within the context of Turkey-EU relations. So thank you very much, and I'm open to questions, and we can also show a few other things that I prepared with the questions.
Do you want to answer questions?
Yes, I can have now questions. Okay. Yes.
And so here's
oh, thanks.
the better one.
Yeah.
So I'll just let Kivanc take questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
What can you say about the recent problems about the freedom of speech in Turkey? So we heard that many people were arrested without any
Yes.
good interrogations or
Especially the journalists.
Journalists, exactly.
Yes,
How can you
especially.
comment on this situation?
Shall we take 2, 3, and then I respond to the instead of one by one, if you permit me. Yeah. Yes.
What's the outcome of, where the protests took place 2 summers ago?
Yes.
What's happened to that area in Istanbul?
I can take one more. Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear you elaborate a little bit more on the mechanisms of the EU's influence in Turkish politics.
Yes.
So I heard you say a lot about conditionality and international pressure, and I think I heard you say, kind of allude to what I would think of as maybe boomerang effects, like so where domestic actors bring their complaints to, like civil society actors bring their complaints to external actors with influence, and those external actors bring the demands back on the state. And I'm wondering, the last kind of mechanism I'm wondering about is kind of to what extent do you see any evidence of persuasion as a mechanism of influence, or do you see most of the responses really reflecting instrumental concerns or considerations?
Yes. So, in regards to freedom of press situation, I think that started to deteriorate from 2008, 2009 onwards, because the Kurds gained the serious posts in local elections, and there was this KCK, which is a kind of civil Kurdish organization who was able to organize efficiently and very well manner the election process. Then, of course, the government felt threatened, and those on the eve of those elections and after that, the street protests and etc. from the side of the Kurds expanded a lot, and some of the journalists were taken inside to prison in those times. After many journalists were taken to prison after the Gezi Park events of the 2 summers ago. And also, they took journalists, I think, from simply criticizing Erdogan and the government. So the situation got worse and worse over the past 4 or 5 years, and the government response to that is that they are not doing journalistic work. They are either spying or provoking or carrying gun or carrying Molotov cocktails, etc. So the government response to that was that they were not doing journalistic work, but the situation with regard to journalists is not very optimistic. Can I say that there is a freedom of speech in absolute terms in Turkey? No. This situation also got worse and worse, and especially President Erdogan personalizes many of the offenses, and he's not a very take it easy person, I would say. He is taking very seriously any bad words said to him. So and they are also after the Gezi Park events, especially obsessed with the journalists who are doing spying work, etc. And also the corruption scandal of the last year affected much, and this pushed some of the journalists to self-censor. And also the government and Erdogan himself was kind of involved with bashing journalists in few major newspapers, and he is phoning them and just get rid of that guy from the post, etc. So because there is, we can speak about freedom of press in Turkey, but the situation of press in Turkey is not very, I would say, democratic at all. It is in the hands of few big owners of press, and they were not simply doing a press press work. They were also taking many procurements and many, other kind of benefits from the government. So, this is and there is the syndicates of the journalists is very weak. And also journalists, civil society groups are very weak in that sense. When you look at the situation from an institutional point of view, it's very easy for an authoritarian leader to abuse all these weak institutional structure. So the journalists are at the mercy of the politicians and the owners of the journal.
They banned Twitter for 2 weeks.
And also, yeah, that is what I call obsession, because Erdogan is not very in that technology. So and many of his friends, I think, at the same time, they don't like at all. Because they saw that it provoked a very wide protest in the case of the Gezi Park events. Since then, they have he banned to use Twitter to his own stuff. Because they have kind of Twitter teams to respond to all these attacks. But he said sometimes that I don't approve them either. So this is the situation, and the more difficult thing is the freedom of press is not easy to institutionalize in that respect, and the press syndicates are very weak, and they are in the hands of the owners of those journals, of those newspapers, which are in business with the government. So, however, this doesn't prevent, of course, to reflect many of the criticisms directed to Erdogan over the past few years. I mean, just 2 days ago, there was a very strong article against the government in New York Times, and we were able to read it in Turkish newspapers. And people are aware that there is a serious criticism of the government. So in that respect, there is a freedom, not a freedom of press, but freedom of information. I mean, at least we can get. I mean, if you follow some of the newspapers, but there are, of course, there are newspapers that are completely defending and taking directions from the government. And this was so in previous governments too. This is not a new phenomenon in Turkey. That is why, I mean, one should underline that.
Also, it creates a very incorrect image of Islamic culture to outsiders.
In the sense that, what? In the sense of what?
Because, AK Party tries to identify itself with Islam, with
Yeah.
Islamic spirituality.
Yes.
And this dictatorship and totalitarian.
Yeah, but there are other stronger and bad images of Islam that we see in Syria, and I mean, Islam is not in good. Islam is unlucky in these days, I would say. The question in relation to Gezi Park events, that is, I would say, I'm not very. I receive this question in many places, but I'm not kind of very excited to respond it or very optimistic about that. Two summers ago, or 3 summers ago, I would say, we faced with an incredible protest in the main square of Istanbul. But after that, this government gained local elections. This government gained presidential elections. So they were, in the anniversary, in the second anniversary of the Gezi Park events, the protests were quite slim. So they were not able to consolidate this public protest. Was not able to consolidate a strong popular opposition or strong opposition of any kind, and also it didn't have, I think, a serious political agenda, which also disappoints many of the followers of that. Somehow, we can speak about that it was also hijacked by the nationalist groups which were part of that protest too. So in that sense, my assessment of those protests is, disappointingly low. And I was expecting a kind of stronger and more consolidated response to this government. However, this of course affected the government. This is, as I mentioned, one of the reasons that they are obsessed with any kind of protests around. So they, they want to check any kind of small protest or in the remotest village in Anatolia or in the northern region against thermic central. They were bashing them with very serious, very strong forces. So this triggered a stronger authoritarianism of the regime, I think, of the AK Party government, and also of Erdogan himself too. So and one thing I should also underline, that Erdogan's propaganda that this was provoked by the foreign press or the foreigners. It is an outside conspiracy against the government actually worked. We see it in the votes that people really thought that this was not simply a domestic, spontaneous, liberal resistance to an authoritarian or growing authoritarian government. It was at the same time an outside conspiracy against this. So this propaganda also worked, I think. Yeah, at least I can follow it in, from my observation because Turkey is not simply Istanbul's main square. Turkey is a very large country. When you look at in different places in Anatolia where they get serious votes, the reaction was quite conservative, of course. Yeah, and so this was my response. But the square is there, and recently, as I heard, the head of local government mayor in Istanbul, they said that the project is ready and they will put it in place when they find the time. That's why I think Erdogan is obsessed with that. That's why they left it as half cement square there, and they are waiting for a time to rebuild what they want to do. But let's see whether they respond. They will face another strong resistance of the people. Yes. And mechanisms. Initially, Jennifer, I think the persuasion played a role, especially in 1999. This was not simply that at that time Bülent Ecevit was prime minister, and he said that the European offer was good, first of all, and secondly he said openly that Turkey was part of European civilization. So and Turkey is a democratic country, and they should do what is necessarily to be done. So they were able to issue 2 reform packages after that, until 2002, and also a national program. The first national program, which outlines the mid-term and long-term reforms, etc. And after that, I was living at that time in Ankara, and I was able to conduct few interviews among the ministries and the EU offices within the ministries, etc. There is within Turkish bureaucracy a serious group that they could save the state. They could, this is an old Committee of Union and Progress, or the old Young Turk saying, they could save the state with the EU reforms. So there was this idea that the reform done with the EU or under the pressure EU is actually good for the state, is actually good for the Turkish state. So these were the motivations. Whether it was a genuinely democratic move, if I would put saving the state or a democratization balance, I would say that the bureaucracy is, pressure on the government is on the side of saving the state. So the 2001 crisis, and after that, the paralyzed economy and paralyzed politics left many of the governing elite to act in that terms, I think. Yeah. So. Yes, please. Yes, you are.
It's a side question that's not directly related to our talk today, but I want to ask you about what you felt the effect of Turkey's selective enforcement of the Montreal Convention of 1936 has had on its relation with the West and with Russia.
What? I didn't understand.
With the Montreal Convention.
I'm not aware of that. I don't know. So Montreal Convention
It's the one that stipulates Turkey has control over the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus Strait.
of the you mean the Montreal? Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Montreal. You said Montreal. That's why I'm not. Yeah. Yeah. So Turkey controls the straits, and of course the Montreal Convention gives free passage in times of peace. That's why, as long as there is no war and the ships are not going to support that war, that is what Turkey implements. And I think this might be an important thing if the problems in Ukraine gets worse and worse. So if there will be a NATO intervention, or if there could be another kind of intervention, so they will see it. And but from the Russian side, I think the point is quite clear. So they want they pressurize Turkey on not to allow, of course, any ship that would go and support insurgency in Ukraine. Yes.
Talking about foreign policy, do you think that Turkey would continue to be a member of NATO, or slowly and gradually move out?
I think it will continue to be part of NATO, because Turkey, since the Second World War, they officially follow the multilateralist foreign policy, in the sense that it gave a lot significance to membership to international institutions and international law. So there is in the foreign ministry a very strong legalist and institutionalist group that gives a lot of importance to that. And I have been, recently I think there was an article in one of the major newspapers whether Turkey seriously follows the NATO rules, etc. I started to listen or read those kind of news as somehow biased towards Turkey. Turkey actually did a lot that serves the Western interest, but the recent government followed a relatively autonomous foreign policy. They wanted to keep their interests in Syria and in the case of Iraq, and I think Turkey has a right to do that. Turkey cannot follow the French interest in Syria always, or the American interest in Iraq always. So that is a problem, if the result of this is criticizing Turkey vocally in international arena, they can do. But I don't think Turkey that derive comes from Turkey. I don't think that Turkey will not pull out from NATO and I don't know whether the NATO members have the right to expulse any country from the membership. I think there is an option of going out of the EU, but I'm not sure whether this is true for
But
NATO.
in the post-Soviet period, what is for Turkey to gain to stay in NATO?
To stay in NATO, you know,
Yeah. What is to be gained?
There are two levels of answers to that. First of all, still the foreign ministry and the top level of the army is tied to NATO. So the governing elite and the bureaucratic elite, so they are the ones who keep that relationship, okay? And of course, they solve the need and the possibility of expanding their interests with relations with Russia. And even probably they saw that they could, they could cooperate with Russia in Syria. They could cooperate with Russia in relation to Armenia or Georgia, etc. However, there was a specific group who was seriously defending this idea, and they were persecuted as a result of those 2-3 cases, judiciary cases, Balyoz and Ergenekon. These were the I can't explain the whole details of that, but there was an internal coup probably within the army that gets rid of this anti-Westerness or completely independent foreign policy. So within the army and the foreign ministry, I see that there is a strong group defending the relations with still along the lines of NATO. However, I mean the pressure from the Western side towards Turkey, we don't know where it will arrive. And their hatred towards Erdogan also might arrive to points where Erdogan, if he stays in power, could act in different ways, and they try to do, of course. And so if I would say that the Western orientation of foreign ministry and the army is clear, I can't say it for the government, because government sees all these as conspiracies against itself, and there is we come to a critical point, I think, in terms of that. But the government is still in there. They didn't fall. Is it explanatory what I'm trying to say? Does it satisfy your answer?
Yeah.
Response? Yeah. So the gain is clear. The gain is economic and institutionalism and identity, etc. So, yes, Marcus.
I think if I understood you before, you sort of said that the EU kind of sort of favored Erdogan and his party because it was less authoritarian than the previous military.
Of course, yes.
Would it be fair to say, but Erdogan was still not democratic enough for him to meet the EU standards of democracy?
That is completely fair. However, no one can reject what I have drawn here. Is from 2002 to 2009, the EU support towards the Justice and Development Party was absolute. No, even the European leaders, they can't say. They completely supported what the government said. They supported their foreign policy aims of zero problems with neighbors too. They celebrated Turkey, Armenian, the protocol of opening the borders. They celebrated Turkey and Syria doing, let's say, organizing common ministerial meetings. They celebrated Turkey's approach towards the Kurds in northern Iraq. I would count, many examples of that.
Was Erdogan sort of surprised? I mean, in the sense that on the one hand, he was good enough to keep the military in check, but then he wasn't good enough to sort of meet the EU standards for proceeding with the accession?
But actually, EU didn't want. EU made some look from the late 2005 onwards. Despite the opening of negotiations, the signals coming from the EU was not optimistic at all. Austrians said that we can't absorb new members, this absorption capacity debate. And late Germans said privileged partnership. And then there was a crisis. And the French said, okay, we don't open the financial chapter because it leads to membership, and Turkey is not supposed to be a member. So the signals coming from the EU side was not promising at all. So that's why this helped the government to look for other policy options and keep the EU negotiations relanti, what is that, going slowly and slowly. Yeah. Yes, Professor.
Given that analysis, does Ukraine fit into this particular relationship in terms of Turkey thinking about what it might be able to extract from the EU in terms of membership?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Does the Ukrainian situation
Yes.
give Turkey leverage with the European Union?
I think yes, because when I'm questioned whether Turkey will be a member of the EU or not, many people expect a very pessimistic answer that Turkey will never be. I don't think so, because Europeans also learned that they had to change their geopolitical and geographical imagination, that the EU and the Europe is not just continental Europe, and there are crises, very serious crises, where they need Turkey, and Syria and Ukraine are quite good examples. And Turkey, I don't think that lost its whole credibility in the region, because we are not at least in civil war, and our economy keeps going fine. So they are not very happy with Erdogan. That is for sure. They don't like him. They don't like to deal him because he has a kind of very strong personal style, and this is not good for the Europeans that are used to seeing Turkey as a junior partner that can be played with. So the democracy didn't bring what the Europeans wanted from Turkey, unfortunately. And this I can tell you because the peace process with the Kurds also is not going bad. So Turkey more or less is able to resolve its domestic problems too. I mean, I say this, of course, with all my moderation and limits of what can be done in that respect. Yes.
I'd be interested to hear you say a little bit more about how you think parties within Turkey, so in particular AK Party, but perhaps also other parties, have used the EU as a tool within domestic politics against competitors.
Yes, I will have a very strong criticism of the Republican People's Party. Now, other day I saw a friend of mine, Aykan Erdemir, who is one of the most, fashionable international deputies of that. I told him, and other day I was in a big conference where the Republican People's Party new and old diplomats and all these pro-republicanist bureaucrats were around, and their questions to there were questions against them. What is your project? What is your? So they said, we are the leading defender of the relations with the West, and in particular the EU. Okay, but this is too late. They had to make all those serious changes in the early 2000s when the AK Party was the one who carried that, and they were the ones who were against the Cyprus negotiations. They were the ones who were against the decentralization bills, which was passed by the AK Party. They were the ones of opening freedom of speech, etc., in terms of the Kurdish situation, etc. So they are now, the time factor is important. Yeah, when and the secularist Republican People's Party were not supposed to be against the EU, but they were against the EU, and they left that space to Erdogan, who used it masterfully to gain leverage against the army, against the opposition, etc. Now they are saying that they are pro-European and they are the contact points of the West in Turkey. Very good, but the population is quite nationalistic, and they saw that conspiracy idea very seriously, I think. So I'm not giving very good answers to this or expected answers, but the mood of the people is neither on the side of the EU, because EU is not a credible actor now like it was in the early 2000s. Publication of EU report or EU Parliament's decision of this and that, it doesn't affect very much. EU's credibility is probably in its lowest level since the late 2000s, since the late 1990s, because of their internal crisis, because of the lack of membership perspective, because of the Ukrainian crisis, because of other crises. Siding with the EU make the EU's pleased, but will not bring them votes, unfortunately. That is my feeling, my perception of the things. So that is what I can say.
Any other questions?
Yes.
No. Well, thank you very much. This was wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you all for coming.
Thank you very much.